My name is Rick Krause, and I am the moderator for tonight's conversation. My first order of business is to introduce our distinguished panel to my left, Cody Beaton. Slight wave to them. I know who you are. Okay, Derek Doherty, Matt Carraway, Lori Carr, Denise Gill in Burbank, and Seth Dewey. I want to draw your attention to the screen above our panelists. There is a website, www.menti.com. If you have a smartphone, I encourage you to find that web address. And enter the code 303-6312 during my opening remarks. What you see is a Wordle. And a Wordle is a software program that gathers common words, sorts them, and displays the most common words in the largest print. So if you could quickly answer the question, what words have you heard used to describe someone with substance use issues? And feel free to continue that as I continue my remarks. I don't want to go any further, however, until I introduce Anna, who's in the back running the computer. Anna enjoys being the center of attention, so everybody turn and wave at Anna. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounded good for her. I also want to acknowledge the staff here at the Historic Fox Theater. Certainly, we are very appreciative of having this great venue for tonight's conversation. A little bit of history for those of you who are not familiar with the Reno Recovery Collaborative, a little bit of history. It was founded in 2015. Its initial goals included the development of a detox center and treatment facility and assisted medical assistance for treatment. Both of those two goals have already been achieved by the collaborative. They continue to work on the expansion of outreach to those who have recurring events and compiling a list of best practices by prescribing policies for pharmacists and doctors. The bus is filled with a lot of great people, but there's room for more. Through the course of tonight's conversation, if you feel like you'd like to become a part of the collaborative, feel free to reach out at the end of this evening's conversation. So why now? I'm a minus 5 years, a lifelong Reno County resident. And I don't have a problem saying that I've always felt that Reno County has had a long-standing drug problem. What happened to change over the course of time was perhaps the drug of choice. I pulled some data from the Reno County Health Department website, and as of January 1, 2021, there have been 142 overdoses with 10 fatalities. Looking at May 1 forward, there have been 50 overdoses and 2 fatalities. And then yesterday there was a press release, and I'm going to read you the first portion of that press release. There has been an alarming increase in fatal and non-fatal overdoses in Reno County, including 3 in a 24-hour period. Since June 17, there have been 15 overdoses, 1 of which was fatal, and 4 heroin overdoses requiring multiple doses of naloxone within a period of 28 hours. This rapid increase likely involves synthetic opioids with illicitly manufactured fentanyl. It's also suspected to be mixed with other substances, including methamphetamines, heroin, fake pills made to look like OxyContin. If that's not a call to action, I don't know what is. So we have goals for this evening. First, I want to mention the collaborative's motto, which is to educate, empower, and engage. Corresponding to 3 nights of this series, tonight is educate. On your calendar, mark down July 16th for empower, and then return on August 16th for engage. But as we think about educating, we want to push an anti-stigma conversation. We want to encourage others to join the collaborative to build momentum, and most importantly, reduce stigma, because we believe there are people in tonight's audience and watching this recording who also have a story to share. It is our hope this evening's conversation and courageous testimonies will provide impetus for others to feel comfortable in telling their own stories. But let me be clear. This is an emotional conversation. Tears are a part of the stories you'll hear tonight, and quite possibly may trigger some emotions on your part. So I'm going to open the panel. Let's take a quick look. If you have not yet entered a keyword, you have about 30 seconds, and I'm going to ask Anna to close that screen because I do not want that to be a distraction from the panelist conversation. So, leading the way, and Cody is going to go first. Cody has a unique perspective. We're going to begin with the end in mind. Where's the hope? Where can people go? What is, from what he has seen? That's what we're going to kick off. And we'll bring Cody back later to talk more about treatment options. But for now, the microphone is yours, Cody.
All right, thank you, Rick. And first of all, I also want to just thank everyone for being here. That's really such a huge thing when we think about it, to have this amount of people come out on a Friday night and come and talk about substance use. And that's really how we start to address stigma. And stigma often leads to shame. And shame is something that can keep people, in their substance use disorder, can keep people down when they're struggling with mental health issues. They say there are 3 solutions to shame, 3 things that keep shame going, which would be secrecy, silence, and judgment. So we don't want to have any secrecy, any silence, or any judgment in this room this evening. This is a safe space. The antidote to shame, and hopefully to stigma as well, is empathy. So that's really what we want to fill the room with. We want to connect with each other. We want to try to put ourselves in others' shoes and understand as best we can. So my name's Cody Beaton. I'm a clinical social worker as well as a licensed addictions counselor. I'm one of MIRR's regional directors, so I oversee a couple of offices in the South Central Kansas region, one of which is in Hutchinson. And that's really been a joy for me to be able to be in my hometown. I grew up here, and to see some of the awesome things that are being done with the Reno Recovery Collaborative. I chair the treatment and healthcare subcommittee, and I'm just really proud of what we've been doing over this last year, really, that I've been involved at MIRR. So just a little about me. Like I said, I grew up in Hutchinson, and I can admit that prior to 10 or 15 years ago, I did not know much about substance use disorder. I did not know much about addiction. And I think because of that, it's easy to fall into the trap of just not understanding it, not knowing too much about it, and being misinformed. There's a lot of controversy still, even in 2021, on whether a substance use disorder is a disease, when in fact it's been classified as a disease since 1955. It's been a long time. But still, there's that idea that there's an element of choice involved in it, and that's what keeps people from putting it into a category with cancer or with diabetes. But when you think about a substance use disorder, you can't necessarily see it as a disease or a choice. It's a disease of choice. It changes your very ability to make decisions. It actually alters your brain chemistry. And so we've got to keep that in mind when we're thinking about people who are attempting to get into recovery, to separate themselves from drugs and alcohol. It's not just a matter of just stop, just quit. There's a lot more to it. And so as folks who don't have a history of substance use disorder or haven't seen it in your family, it takes some work. It takes some effort in an attempt to understand and to empathize, to be able to see what that world is like. And we hope that a space like this can help us move in that direction. So, as I've said, I don't have a history of substance use myself, but being in the field for about the last decade, I have this compilation of thousands of stories that I've been able to be a part of. I was blessed to have good mentors and to find my way into this field, and I'm so happy that I have, because I've got to meet such great people, some of whom I share the stage with tonight. I've seen the damage the stigma can cause tenfold. I've seen it on all different levels. I've seen it when a person, uses stigma upon themselves, when they fall victim to that shame, whether they feel like they can't do it, like they're not worth anything. I've seen families give up on people trying to go to recovery. I've seen employers give up on people who have substance use disorders. Systemically, I've seen the insurance world not give people adequate stays in treatment. When I first started, 2012 or so, we could have people in residential treatment for 30 days easy, and that was great. 5 or 6 years later, it was difficult to have people covered by their insurance for about 2 weeks. And this really goes against the research, because research shows that about 90 days in a structured environment works best for folks who are trying to get into recovery and separate themselves from drugs and alcohol. A year is even better, but yet we're fighting for 2 weeks, for someone to get covered. When you think about cancer and you think about diabetes, we have access to care with those things, so we don't have the shame that keeps us from reaching out and accessing services. So that's what we want for substance use. We want to be able to access those services that are life-saving. So going back to stigma and shame, there's this thing called a shame cycle. So people may use substances because they're ashamed, and then they're ashamed because they use. And it's this vicious cycle, and it's really difficult to get out of. And often, that cycle is exacerbated by trauma. It's exacerbated by other mental health issues. It's not a requirement, to have trauma or to have mental health issues, to develop a substance use disorder. However, it's there a lot of the time. So I really want to talk about trauma. That's something that I've specialized in my career. And something to consider with trauma is that it's different for everyone. We have what are called big T's and little t's. So the big T's are the traumas that we all recognize, right? So military combat, rape, sexual assault, the loss of a child. These are the big traumas that we can all say, oh yeah, that would probably affect someone pretty seriously. But we have to consider that trauma is basically just the brain feeling that you cannot handle this situation, and so it doesn't process it fully. And so this could be something lesser in scale, or something that is more impactful to one person but less impactful to another. So we have to remember that everyone experiences things differently. When thinking about trauma, I think the best analogy for it is to think about your life as a long, narrow hallway. Now, if you would imagine that long, narrow hallway having file cabinets lined on one side of it completely to the end. So it's pretty crowded. There's not much room to walk. Whenever we have just a normal, everyday experience in our life, that information goes into its appropriate file cabinet, its appropriate drawer, and it gets filed away. Our brain does that. There are no emotions left over. There are no negative cognitions about what happened. For instance, me coming here tonight, driving to the Fox Theater. I live in Wichita, so driving here, coming here, doing this event, hopefully nothing traumatic happens, in the next 30 minutes. That gets filed away, and it's just a memory that I had. When I have a similar memory in the future, it doesn't trigger me or bring anything back. When I have something that's traumatic to me, whatever it may be, the brain protects me from it, so it doesn't process that fully. So imagine that information maybe going into the drawer, but not fully. It doesn't get shut. All those negative emotions like fear and shame and doubt still reside with that memory. And now our brain has these memory networks, and so whenever I have something occur that's similar to that event in the future, it's going to connect. And so now not only do I have that one open drawer that's in my way in the narrow hallway of my life, but I have multiple drawers opening up throughout the hallway of my life. And so I'm just trying to move on, but I keep getting stuck. I get the sensation of I can't get past this, and I have these negative feelings about myself, and they hold me back from being who I want to be. And so if you can imagine yourself in a situation like that, it's pretty easy to imagine self-medication coming into the picture. Or just unhealthy things that you may do as a person. And so substance use disorders can sometimes stem from that type of trauma, feeling stuck like I can't go anywhere that allows me to escape or to be a different version of myself. And so the reason that I tell you about trauma is that we have to consider what's behind that substance use disorder, what occurred in this person's life that may play a role in it. And so with all that said, and coming back to kind of what was on the screen just a few minutes ago, we want to make sure to humanize people. We're all humans, regardless of what we're dealing with, regardless of if we're diagnosed with a substance use disorder, there is much more to us than that. And so some of those terms that we put up there, that's labeling people. That's saying they're this, they're that, they're nothing more. Whereas we know that folks who are recovering from a substance use disorder are so much more, right? They lead initiatives like this, and they have kids, and they're cooks, and they work in the substance use field, and they do all sorts of amazing things. So we have to remember that they're much more, and I just have a ton of respect for folks in recovery due to the work I've done over this last decade. And so with that, I just want to, reemphasize, let's keep this a safe space, and let's just talk about this, and I appreciate you all coming out to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Nice job, Cody. Next, I'd like to invite Derek to come talk about the hazards of painkillers.
Wish you would have gone a little longer, Cody. It's fine, though. It's fine. I just want to say good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on a Friday evening to be a part of the conversation. and to help be part of the solution. My name is Derek Doherty, and I am a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. What that means to me is I haven't felt the need to use a mind-altering substance since December 15th of 2018. Thank you. Growing up, we were taught to say no to drugs. Neither of my parents ever had substance use disorder, and none of my siblings do either. We were raised with strong Christian values and taught right and wrong and taught to work hard. When I was 11, my parents divorced and I went to live with my dad and my stepmom out on a small farm by Arlington. I always did well in school. I graduated with honors in high school and I was expected to attend college. Instead, I chose to enter the workforce at 19 and I met who would be my wife for 18 years. We started a family, eventually having 4 amazing kids, a house, 2 vehicles, the American dream, as it were. A few years into working at what would be my employer for the next 18 years, I suffered a back strain, and it was really bad, and I was in a lot of pain, and I was prescribed opiates by a local doctor. The feeling from the opiates was something I had never experienced. It was a euphoria and before I knew it, I wasn't just taking them for the pain, but I was taking them for that euphoric feeling. I steadily had a prescription, and eventually that ran out, but I was still able to acquire more from others that I knew at my job that had the same problems that I did and had the same prescriptions. I justified my substance use on the fact that they were prescribed by a doctor, even if they weren't prescribed to me. Years went by, and I was able to white-knuckle it at times for months and even for years, never considering myself as a person with a substance use disorder. At this time in my life, outside people or events could curb or even pause my substance use, especially when my wife and I at the time were expecting a new child. However, the desire for them would eventually win, and I would go back to using. I would go back to a life with a secret, with a mask I was hiding my shame. To the outside world, including my wife and close friends and family, I was just a normal guy. I worked hard, long days to provide for my family. I loved spending time with my kids. At the time, my wife and I even had date nights. I would do normal things just like everybody else. I'd go to church. I played softball, played fantasy football. I volunteered to help at the school. I served at my church. I served in the community. But I had this secret that I felt if I told anyone, I would just lose everything. My job was a good job. It offered some kind of treatment option if you asked for their help. I'd seen others do this, and in return, they were ostracized and their careers were destroyed, even after they had done what they could to get the help that they needed. I thought to myself, I have a family and friends that didn't know about my substance use disorder, and I had a family to provide for, so I just put my mask on and I stayed silent. Eventually, my substance use disorder became out of control when I added the use of methamphetamine to my opiate use. And that's when I lost my job, I lost my wife, my family, and my self-respect. I lost everything. The mask was gone, but I was lost in a world where I felt alone and ashamed, filled with guilt. You know, I didn't want to feel this way anymore. So I numbed myself how I knew. And that was with substance use disorder. I continued to use. My life had become unmanageable and out of control. I would eventually be arrested and placed on corrections. I'd find myself truly at the end of my rope with no idea how or what to do. I saw myself in the mess I'd created and just wanted to be done with all of it. I wanted to be done with the drugs. I wanted to be done with myself. I wanted to be done with my life. Finally, a good friend offered to pay for an assessment at the Substance Abuse Center of Kansas. And that started a new chapter in my life. I started attending regular recovery meetings. I met with my peer counselor. I met with drug counselors. During this time, I was also introduced to Oxford House. And after some prodding, I moved there. I had to learn a new way to live, a life without substance use. Then I was accepted into the Transitional Jobs Program at New Beginnings to help me work through my work barriers that had developed during my active substance use disorder. It's funny how those are a muscle, going to work, doing your job. Yeah, I'd done that for years, but I'd done that with the use of a substance, misuse of a substance. And at that point in my recovery, I didn't have those muscles. But through time, I did. Over the course of the next 2 years, I would have to humble myself and become honest, willing, and open-minded to the help that had found me, to the new support in my life. Now, I have gainful employment, and I'm a positive member of our community. I co-parent and my children like a pro, and I'm active in their lives. There's 2 of them here tonight. Oxford made such an impact on me that I'm still active with the Oxford Houses, and that's after moving out. I've been in my own place for 6 months now. I have a community of support. I'm not alone, and I no longer have to wear masks. There's a beautiful quote by the poet Rumi that I feel applies to many of our lives, including my own, and that is that the wound is where the light enters you. There is hope, and we do recover. Thank you.
Great story, Derek. And you may be asking yourself, how can someone follow that story? Well, I have an answer. Matt. I'm going to talk more about masks and stigma. And as Matt comes forward, I might point out, occasionally you'll hear a young voice shout out from the front. That's Matt's daughter shouting, yelling out to her daddy, "Go Dad." So have at it.
Hi, I'm Matthew Caraway, and 39. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I've actually been substance-free since May 20th of 2020 now, which is... Thank you. And that's something that I cannot do on my own. I also have mental health issues. Also, that's something I cannot do on my own. That all comes from support. So me doing that is not by myself by any means. I finally found a way that I can get help and recover from the issues that I've got. I'll start at the beginning. I was actually raised by a drill sergeant. So I was raised with get up, get over it, don't show emotions, just do what you have to do, and just basically just get over it, don't show anybody weakness, basically. And then about 15, I hit my first major bout of depression, and not just because of how I was raised, but because how people would talk around me with depression and anxiety. I wouldn't speak out about what I was going through. And that lasted for a little while. It got better over some time, a little bit. Of course, it's kind of hit and miss with me. I've now been getting mental health care for 13 years, and am finally now not on any medications or anything. I still do therapy, but that's kind of a process in itself too. But after I'd had that first major bout of depression, starting at 15 is when I really started experimenting with alcohol and drugs, because you get that immediate gratification if you just don't feel good, don't feel well enough to get up even out of bed, or if somebody's like, well, what's wrong with you, because you're not being upbeat like you normally are, like I was. And I found a way to mask that and hide it, and that was with drugs and alcohol. Because it's really hard to tell with some people at first, especially once they start getting a tolerance and they just have some practice at being able to hide it, unfortunately. Then in my 20s, I started playing in bands and learned how socially acceptable alcohol use can be. So I was really able to hide my alcohol use because it was really acceptable in what I did most of the time. I still worked full-time, but I did that also. So it made it just socially acceptable. So really, I could really hide behind my use. Then depression started kicking back into my life too. Of course, that's when alcohol withdrawal really started taking part in my life, and I actually had no clue what alcohol withdrawal was until I was around somebody at one point, and I was having seizures and I had no idea. I would come to all of a sudden, I would be looking like I was beat up. I'd be bruised and everything everywhere. Doors still be locked. You know, nobody had broke in, so I'm like thinking, what in the world's going on? Then I finally got around a friend, and he told me what was happening. Let's see where I'm at. Sorry, I don't usually speak in front of a lot of people. I'm more of a one-on-one person, so I have to go off my notes here. But stigma kept me from reaching out, and I didn't know who to talk to because anytime I would bring it up, I felt judged, especially if I would hear somebody talk about, you know, somebody with depression. Well, they should just get over it, stuff like that. I'm like, okay, bam, I shut down. Well, I'm not talking to that person about what's going on with me, and so I would hide it. Let's see. And that fear, guilt, and shame just pretty much dominated my world at that time because, of course, then I would cause problems with not only myself but those around me, just basically ruining my life. I kind of fast forward up until about 18 months ago, and I actually ended up with a possession charge and then was trying to get clean and was still struggling to get clean. And I got another possession charge that what I did was I had an empty baggie in my pocket and I kept it there for 2 days until I finally decided somebody I was around. I just started arguing with them and told them they're going to have to call the cops for me to stop. The cops showed up and I told them exactly what was in my pocket so they could get me out of there. That's the kind of desperation I was at. I was willing to get a felony just to leave where I was at because I didn't know where to go, what to do. The only help I was really getting at the time and that I felt like I could reach out to were my corrections officer, actually. And I really wanted more help, but I still couldn't go to that person. It was kind of a cry out for help. You know, I'm really lucky to get as far as I have. You know, once I felt stigmatized, I didn't care what I did with my life because I was like, well, I'm already in that box, so it really doesn't matter. You know, and at this point, I wanted to change that. Then at that point, once I got that second charge, I moved into an Oxford house also and started doing a bunch of classes geared around recovery and mental health, including like a mental health first aid class. Now I'm actually trained to kind of help with that. And it doesn't allow me to treat anybody, it just helps me to help them get to where they're going safely. And this is actually the first time I ever felt free to express what I was going through in life openly by being around others that had the same problem as me. And discovering that they actually had the same problems I did with not being able to feel open to talk about it with people just because of the stigma that came with even just basic word usage. And now that I've found support, my life has totally changed. You know, if anything's kind of even starting to go a little bit south, bam, somebody's right there at my door 3 minutes later. I'm not even kidding. This just happened earlier this week. I am so thankful for that. It is not even funny. The dealing with mental health issues is easier. It's easier to judge ourselves off of what others say, whether they know what we're dealing with or not. But when we hear judgment, it automatically shuts us down, easier than speaking up when we're stigmatized. So I just happened to get really lucky and fell into that streamline of people that have gotten help and showed me also how to get help and find a better way of life and actually be able to look past the stigma so that other people know that they can do the same thing too. This is where everybody else comes into play at the same time. Just by the words that you say in front of somebody can make them shut down and not even want to talk about what's going on with them. They're not going to want to reach out for help. So it's actually up to each and every one of us to be able to be there when somebody does want help. That's what happened with me. I just want to pass that torch to everybody else too. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Well done, Matt. So we're going to press pause just for one moment and give you a chance to unpack a little bit. I have 3 instructions for you. The second task you're going to do is you'll see up front there are 2 microphones. Give you an opportunity when we come back from our short pause to ask questions of Derek, Matt, or Cody if you would like to. Also, you'll see a notepad and a piece of paper if you have microphonebia, which is on the internet, so it has to be a thing, the fear of microphones. We have a way for you to communicate as well. So just jot your question down on a piece of paper, hand it to me, and I will read it for you. So that's the second task. The first task is I'm going to have you turn to a shoulder partner and unpack what's going through your brain right now. One warning in advance, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. And when it's time for us to come back, I'm going to say, "May I have your attention, please?" I'm going to put my hand in the air. And my request to you is if you see my hand up, just raise your hand as well. And that will bring all of us back in just a few seconds if it works like it's supposed to. So right now, you're going to find a shoulder partner. What's going on in your brain right now? The audience participation starts now. May I have your attention, please? Thank you. I hope you had a nice opportunity to share what's going on in your brain and unpack a little bit, because there's a lot of really good stuff going on up here, and it's hard for you to take all of it in without having a chance to process a little bit. Anna, if you would put up the Wordle from the start of the evening. Matt talked about the choice of words and how you can perhaps further or shut down a conversation at the same time. I'm pretty sure that all of us can relate or have a definition of the words that you see on the screen. May have used them at different times with no ill will intended, just perhaps stating a fact from your perception. No one wants to think on a Friday night, so I'm going to ask you to reflect on the word choices you see on the screen. As you think about an anti-stigma campaign, are these positive or are they negative? Commonly used words, been in society for a long time. As we try to shift perception in the paradigm about how people believe about substance users, perhaps an opportunity for some word replacement. Thank you, Anna, for putting that up. We'll have a chance at the end of the evening for you to participate in this activity once again. So along the way, you might be thinking about alternate words that maybe we could use instead of what you saw on the screen. I might ask also, when you came in, you should have received, it says survey at the top, with the big QR code on it. If you have not, please put your hand up. Troy will be happy to get one in your hands. It is not important at this very moment, but it may be important for you down the road. So a little bit of a housekeeping task. Thank you, Troy, for helping out with that. We're going to continue with our speakers, and I'm going to invite Lori Carr. Lori is the parent of a substance user.
Words: esteem, pride, respect, dignity, praise, approval, compliment, kindness, affection, love. Everyone deserves to hear, to experience, and receive these wonderful words and feelings. Everyone. People are people, and people deserve to be treated with respect. Unfortunately, the 10 words that I just spoke are actually antonyms. They're the opposite. They're the opposite of stigmatizing words. So what's stigma? Stigma is stereotype. Stigma is prejudice. Stigma is discrimination. Stigma is being labeled for having a disease. It's being labeled for having a disease. Stigma is being treated as less than. My name's Lori Carr, and I work at the Reno County Health Department in the Health Education and Promotion Office, where we work on different community health issues, one of which we're here tonight to discuss, substance use disorders. So, we're here tonight to talk about the stigma that's experienced by individuals who use drugs. We're here to begin the hard discussion of how we remove stigma, labeling, stereotyping. We're here to educate, empower, and engage. We're here to discuss what is an anti-stigma campaign and what can we do as a community to change how people who use drugs are treated and viewed. Easy task, right? So how does this substance misuse stigma affect me? I am the mother of a person who misuses drugs, who suffers from the disease of addiction, from substance use disorder. And I'm here to share my story, not my son's, my story. That's his to tell. But this is my experience of stigma. I've been on this journey of being affected by the disease of addiction, the disease of substance use disorder, and the stigma attached to it for over 16 years, and I still feel looked down upon. I still feel judged, less than. This exhausting journey of worry, confusion, blame, shame, lack of knowing what in the heck should I do, this has been my stigma. The first time that I experienced the feeling of stigma, the opposite of those 10 beautiful words I started with, was when parents who found out about my son's issues, they quit talking to me. Not kidding, true. They would actually turn the other way when they saw me. These were friends. These were people who were part of my world until they saw the big stain on my family. The second time that I so strongly experienced stigma was when I heard someone say, and this is true, if parents would just watch their kids wouldn't do drugs. Talk about a visceral punch in the gut. That one still gets to me, and I'm still reeling from that comment years ago. So is it necessary for us as a community to talk about it? The stigma attached to substance use disorder? Do we crack this conversation wide open? Yes. Is it going to be easy to do? Absolutely not. In fact, I'm up here shaking anyway. It's just tough to do this to begin with. When I first learned about my son's disease of addiction, his substance use disorder, I had absolutely no idea what to do or where to turn. And believe me, those of you who know me, I'm a pretty resourceful person. But due to the stigma attached to being a parent of a person who misuses drugs and not knowing anyone else who was experiencing this, I was at a total loss. It was a mess. No one talked about this. The shame was unreal. I must be a failure as a parent. I don't even know how to help my son. So much negative self-talk in my head. And of course, you don't share this with anyone. You deal with it yourself, right? You burden this trauma, you tamp it down because you're a failure, and you do your best to deal with this beast. You just pull yourself right up by the bootstraps mentality. You do this in isolation because you don't talk about it, right? Because of stigma. So once I'd exhausted my confidential resources, you don't talk about it for fear of being judged, I had this epiphany. I need some help. I'm a pretty sick person, and I was. So I found a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and I walked in, admittedly hysterical, to ask, where could I go to find help? No one had been able to help direct me to resources or help me because you don't talk about it. But this kind woman, she listened to me and she told me about Al-Anon. So I went to an Al-Anon meeting where I met other family members who had loved ones with this horrible disease of addiction, this substance use disorder. And I did find some solace for a while, but I stopped going because it just didn't fit my personal path to recovery. But Al-Anon was such a great gift and start and has worked for many others. Addiction, substance use disorder, it's a family disease. and I consider myself sick from this ugly and pervasive disease, and I'm doing my best to navigate my path to recovery. Fortunately, for me, I love to read, so I read everything I could about addiction, substance use disorder, that I could absolutely find. I searched for years to find the why. Why'd my son, why did he turn to drugs? Why wouldn't people talk about this? Why was I made to feel like such a failure? And I can't even begin to imagine the weight of stigma that my son felt and still feels. So, educating myself about the disease of substance use disorder, it's empowered me. It's empowered me to talk more readily about it. Talking about it helped me to engage others more readily in this greatly needed discussion. Talking about it lightens this heavy backpack that I carry of worry, of shame, of guilt. That list goes on. And of course, the what did I do wrongs, the how could I have prevented this as being looked down upon, being stigmatized through this exhausting, constant journey, it only adds to the pain. And all the while I'm feeling stigmatized, I'm wondering, is my son okay? Does he have food? Is he alive? Currently, I do everything I can to talk about this ugly disease of addiction, substance use disorder. I do it to educate people, to empower people and engage people. I love my son deeply. I love him and I text him this daily because I really currently don't know if he's okay, if he has food, if he's alive. But he knows that I love him. And now what I do, I participate in an online support group for family members who have a loved one suffering from this disease. And it allows me to connect with others who get it. This allows me to feel supported. I shared in one of our recent support meetings that I feel like Linus from Peanuts, walking around with this big cloud of stink following me everywhere I go. Stigma. At these meetings, I can leave my blanket of stink behind as I talk about this horrible and unjustly stigmatized disease with others who are also on this painful path. So what next? Know the facts. Educate yourself about substance use disorders. Join our collaborative. Be aware of your own beliefs, your own biases, your own attitudes about substance use disorder. Choose your words carefully when talking about substance use disorder. Educate others. Focus on the positive aspects of people. Support people. I heard Matt talk about support. Be there for people. Be a part of the solution. Seek out help if you need to talk to someone. Parents, reach out to me. I'm an open book. Esteem, pride, respect, dignity, praise, approval, compliment, kindness, affection, love. Let these words be your guide. Let your words guide your kindness. People are people.
Well done, Lori. Before I bring Denise up, I owe you an apology. I had told you there were 2 tasks, and I can remember one of them, which was the open mic opportunity. So there'll be another chance, and Cody, you need to hold me accountable because I can't do it on my own, obviously. So there will be a chance for you to ask questions of the panelists towards the end of the evening. So invite Denise, who can talk to us about living with a user.
Hello, my name is Denise Gilliland Burbank, and I'm the Community Impact Coordinator for the United Way of Reno County. My job has little to do with why I'm here tonight, other than it has allowed me to be involved with the Reno Recovery Collaborative. Substance misuse has swirled around me in one way or another most of my life. As a child, I have few memories of my biological father, other than it usually involved him having a beer in his hand. I also have an uncle who has struggled with substance use disorder as long as I can remember. Major holidays were always a source of trauma and dread because I never knew what chaos would break loose because of his behaviors. The worry I have seen my grandma have for decades over his substance misuse is heartbreaking, and to see how she has carried around the shame and blame is sad. To my mom and stepdad's credit, the one thing that they always did was talk about the behaviors I saw as a child. We talked about drugs openly, we talked about substance use disorder, and we talked about how it runs on both sides of my family. They never hid the ugly parts of substance abuse or the trauma my family members were experiencing firsthand because of the disorder. But even having these open conversations left me incredibly naive to what someone who is in active addiction looks like, acts like, and speaks like. You see, I was in an intimate relationship with a man who struggles with substance misuse for 4 years, and we have 2 children together. Looking back, I know there were multiple red flags that I saw with his abuse of alcohol. I guess the bottom line is I didn't want to see them. I wanted to see the person I fell in love with. I wanted to see his charm, charisma, quick wit, intelligence, and humor. Over the last 6 years, my children have been deeply affected by their father's substance misuse. I have reached a point I can tell just by talking to him on the phone if he's actively using alcohol or methamphetamine. I've lost count of the number of times I've had interactions with DCF, law enforcement, family court, and been to mediation. In the nonprofit work I have done over the past several years, I have sat in meetings with the same officers that have been to my house the day before, sat in the same room with judges who presided over my custody case weeks prior, and had to go make a presentation at a school about the importance of mentoring just days after the school was put on lockdown due to his behavior. The personal stigma and shame I have felt at times has been a struggle and unbearable to deal with. My story makes people uncomfortable. How does a girl who has a college education, a good job, who's never been in trouble, and active in a community end up in a situation like this? The simple answer is until a person with substance use disorder is out of control, they can hide it extremely well from everyone, including the people they live with, and especially those that they love the most. My kids are 7 and 8 now. Over the past several months, our conversations have had to change about their dad. They are old enough now to tell me they're angry and upset when they can't see him. During the times when my kids can't see their dad, I have always tried to be honest with them about what's going on. Up until recently, I have just told them that their daddy's brain is sick, and until it gets better, it's not safe to spend time with him alone. In April, after doing a massive amount of research and talking to several people, I felt like it was time to tell them about why their dad's brain is sick. We talked about drugs openly. We talked about their dad being unable to make good choices when he was taking drugs, and that it also makes his brain more sick to where he can't take care of them safely. I've worked so hard to facilitate a relationship between my children and their father, constantly leaving ways open that he can see them. It breaks my heart to know that my kids are hurting. It breaks my heart to know that right now that we're having the easy conversations about drugs and their dad. But most importantly, it breaks my heart to know that my kids feel like they're not enough for him to get the help that he needs to have a healthy relationship with them. These are the realities that I live in. I could get on this stage and give you a laundry list of all of the ways that this man has hurt my children and myself over the years. But I make a constant choice every single day to speak about him as a person who has experienced several traumatic events in his life, knowing that those very events and how we tell men to just deal with it are what has contributed to his mental health and substance misuse issues. The bottom line is he's still a person. He deserves to be able to get the help that he needs so he can be an active part of his children's life. I have mentally and emotionally prepared myself that the next conversation I have to have with my children is that their dad is no longer alive or that he is in jail. But I will always hold on to the hope that the next conversation is that he is getting the help that he needs to make sure that he can spend time with them again. My hope is that having these difficult conversations, that we're able to break down the barriers that allow those who are struggling to get the help that they need, but also so families can get the help that they need.
Okay, well, we're going to turn it back over to you for another couple of minutes to have a conversation with someone next to you about some reflections from the stories that you heard from Lori and Denise. You have 2 minutes. And so I'm going to invite Seth to come talk about anti-stigma campaign. Seth. Applause already. You haven't even spoken yet, and already you're cheering.
All right, so my name is Seth Dewey, and I too am a person in long-term recovery. And what that looks like for me is I haven't felt the need to use a mind-altering substance since July 23rd of 2017. And what that has done for me is it's opened up a lot of doors. For instance, now I have the privilege of working at the Reno County Health Department and have a lot to do with the Reno Recovery Collaborative and get to work with a lot of great people in recovery and in this community. So when we think about tonight, what would success look like for us when we leave this gathering? We're not going to answer that right now. I'm going to talk a little bit and then we'll come back to it. It's been mentioned tonight several times by Rick and Lori as well that we're wanting to do 3 things, right? We're wanting to educate, we're wanting to empower, and then we're wanting to engage. Have we done any of those things yet? Well, to answer that, let's do a little recap, okay? Let's do a little bit of a education, if you will, about what we've seen and, more importantly, what we've heard tonight. So going back to what Cody said, there's types of stigma, right? 3 types. The first type that we're going to talk about is the type that was referred to by Derek and Matt. This is called self-stigma. This happens when someone internalizes these negative messages about people who use drugs, like we saw earlier, and then what do? They apply that to themselves. And they begin to view themselves as only that, as only those terms. What does this lead to? Well, it leads to a lower sense of self-esteem, feeling less than, and then an increased sense of shame. It can cause someone to not access the support that's available to them because they fear being judged, discriminated against, or as Derek said, ostracized. This can, in effect, have a dangerous effect on someone hiding their substance use, and then, of course, leading to them potentially getting in the dangerous habit of using alone, which unfortunately is one of the main reasons of the rise in fatal overdoses. So we see that self-stigma that was so amazingly told by Derek and Matt. Then we have the second kind of stigma, social stigma. And we can see this in the negative attitudes or the behaviors towards people who use drugs, or towards their friends and their families. Remember how Denise and Lori both felt? Not feeling like they could talk to anyone safely about what they were experiencing, fearing that they too would be judged, or not knowing where they could go to for support. It can also include negative labels and images in everyday conversation and in the media. And of course, today we see it all the more so on social media, where these words are thrown around all the time. So much hate and so much judgment. And finally, we have one of the most common and yet one of the most dangerous examples of social stigma. Talking about substance misuse disorder like it is a choice rather than what it has been proven to be, a treatable, chronic medical disease. Social stigma. So for the third kind, this is one that Cody also alluded to, structural stigma. Right? This is where we get into the very things that make our system up. Our organizational structure. So this would include the policies and health and social services that increase stigma, such as not providing needed services to individuals that need services because the substance use doesn't meet up to their criteria or it needs to be better managed. It also looks like when healthcare providers or first responders don't take people affected by substance misuse seriously. It also includes workplace policies that can cause harm and unintentionally encourage people to hide their using or prevent them from seeking help. Once again, like Derek mentioned in his story. And it also looks like not connecting people with health or social services because of their use. And if they do manage to get services, it's a lower quality of care. 3 types of stigma. So wasn't this eye-opening to learn from our panelists tonight? This gave us a pretty good education, right? That first thing that we talked about, the education. But not just an education. When we heard them, we started to get something else. We started to have a little bit of an understanding, a little bit of a relatability, almost empathy. Like we could feel their pain in our heart. We felt a connection. Why is that so important? We could answer it simply and say, well, it's so important because of what it made me feel. But as Johann Hari said in his book, Chasing the Scream, and I quote, the opposite of addiction is connection. I don't know about you, but when I heard these panelists, I felt closer to them. I felt an empowering sense of humanity, being connected to my fellow human. So we got some education that led us to increased knowledge and understanding that led us to a feeling of empowerment. So how then do we engage? Because that's the only thing that's left out of those 3, right? The engagement. So how do we take this feeling that we're feeling now, these conversations that we're having here, how do we take those with us after tonight? How do we take those with us to the barbecue with our neighbors tomorrow? Or to church with us on Sunday? Or how do we take these conversations to work with us on Monday? Well, it all starts with us. So there's a big round of applause for everybody here because you're the ones that are here having this conversation with us. But it also is a responsibility for us to make a commitment, to make changes, to hold ourselves accountable to what we're talking about tonight. How so, you might ask? Well, it's been mentioned several times. We can start by changing how we talk about substance use. The language that we choose to use has a direct and a deep impact on those around us. See, we can reduce stigma by changing the words we use to talk about this issue. We can use kind words. We can make it easier for someone to speak up, to feel understood, and to receive help. There seems to be this attitude that it was hard on me, so it has to be hard on you. That's not the case. That way of thinking can go right out the window with all the other garbage. We can use person-first language, saying person who uses drugs rather than drug abuser, or person in recovery rather than addict. See, this shows it for what it is. Using person-first language shows that the person is experiencing a problem. They're experiencing substance use disorder. They are not substance use disorder. Derek and Matt, they are not substance use disorder. That is not all that they are. I'm sure their kids would tell you that as well. So we can use medically accurate and neutral words when describing substance use. We can use language that shows care and concern rather than judgment. We can speak up when we hear someone being treated or talked to in a disrespectful way. Is that easy? It's not. Can it be done? Yes, it can. We can also use language that acknowledges and promotes recovery, that shows that it is possible, that there is hope, and that there's not one way to recovery. And therefore, we can support all paths that lead to recovery. Hopefully, all of us are feeling a little more educated, a little more empowered, and ready to engage our fellow Reno County residents and everywhere else you go to, hopefully. So earlier I asked, what would progress look like for us as we leave tonight? Well, it's summed up into 5 points right here. So the first one is that, like Lori said, people are people. They are not defined by their condition of substance use disorder. 2, we can be more respectful, compassionate, and caring to those that use substances, even though it might take a while, and even though that might be hard. We can no longer afford to have the attitude that people have to hit rock bottom, because people are not getting a chance to come back from that rock bottom. They're dying first. 3, we can educate our friends and our family and pass on facts. And we can stand up and we can challenge the stereotypes. 4, we remember that substance use disorder is not a choice. It is a medical condition that is treatable and that it deserves treatment, no matter what stage an individual is at. And 5, most importantly, we can be aware of our own attitudes and our own behaviors, because they may be influenced too by stereotypes, negative stories, and images of people who use drugs. Is this something that's going to happen overnight? No. These are all things that have been the way it's been talked about for years, and the way that it's been done for years. But the way that it's been done for years, it's not working. So we have to make these changes. We have to hold one another accountable. Make a conscious effort to change the way we talk. And then it becomes the new normal. We've heard that a lot lately. So real quick, this is where I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation. Okay, so how many of you in the audience identify as a person who has struggled with substance use disorder and that is in recovery? Stand up. I want to see you. Stay standing up. Hey, Derek and Matt, you got to stand up too. You guys got to stand up too. Yeah. You just said you were in recovery, so you got to stand up. Now, keep standing up, everybody that was standing up. In recovery, all right? Now, how many of you in the audience love someone who is in recovery or uses substances? How many of you know someone, just know someone who uses substances or is in recovery? This right here is why we must have these conversations. Everybody knows somebody. We are all connected. You can sit down, sorry. We're going to just make you stand up for the rest of the night. No. So, stigma dies when we create safe spaces for people to talk about their experiences. Do we want Reno County to be a safe space? I know I do. Then let's do it.
Well spoken, Seth, as always. So before we bring Cody back up for his encore, I promised an open mic opportunity. Questions that anybody would like to ask the panel? Come forward. Microphones are on either side of the aisle. Feel free.
I'll have to say, when you guys first sat down up there, I was thinking, I wonder what kind of degrees and letters behind their name everybody has there. I mean, you look like highly educated, intelligent people up there. And I have been delighted to see that you filled this panel with primary experts. Sorry, Cody. Thank you. Was it Derek, Matt, Lori, Denise, and Seth? Thank you so much. My question for you guys is, do you guys realize how powerful your courage to come up here and speak about your personal experience is? Do you guys realize that by doing this tonight, you are saving lives? I would like to hear one of you speak to that.
So for me, it's what was done for me, right? When I got to SAC, which is the Substance Abuse Center of Kansas, it was my peer mentor shared her story, and then there was a presentation by Oxford, and I started hearing my own story in the other people that were there. And I went from this position and this space in my head where I thought I was alone to, just like Seth had spoke about, feeling connected. And that was at a point in my life where I could count the number of people I interacted with on one hand, because it was just, not just the stigma, but where I was mentally, emotionally. And it became a family, and the group got bigger and bigger and bigger, because the more I shared, the more they shared. There was just that connection, and it gave me hope, and it gave me life. And if my story, and I'm sure they feel the same way, can help save just one person's life, then it's worth it. I mean, that's the only way that we move forward on this is through that connection. That's the only way. It takes everyone.
That brings me back to a major section I actually did not put in mind that is actually a part of my story. The same with me. It was people shared their story and made me feel like I actually had hope. I used to frequent this hospital. 3400 is a psychiatric unit. I've been there over 40 times. I've attempted suicide 3 times. I've been in the state hospital twice. And I'm still here because of people that shared their stories. What would I be doing with my life if I didn't do the same thing that somebody else did for me? I work at the homeless shelter. I get to experience firsthand even people experiencing some of the same things. Of course, there are various reasons why people are in that position, not just because of substance misuse. But just being able to have that care that somebody had for me, being able to share that. So I do appreciate the encouragement, because we do need that encouragement, because it is really hard sometimes in this position of watching people die. It is extremely hard because we get really close to these people. It's a blessing when we get to see them succeed. You know, I feel like a blessing, and I'm just so glad that I get to do what I get to do. And even just sharing this in the room, like I stated earlier, I'm usually one-on-one. So I do appreciate the encouragement. So that's really all I've got, though. Thank you.
Okay, one, I would like to say I do agree with what he said. I'm very grateful for the fact that you guys are doing this, because as a teen who is recovering from substance use, I've been 2 years free. It's very eye-opening to see the different perspective from, like, you know, adults and kids, and to see how I could put my mother in a certain position. And so it really is a blessing. It definitely is a miracle from God to have people like you, you know, in this society at this time. I have 2 questions, one from him and one from me. He doesn't really feel like speaking, so I'm going to ask for him. So when I mention being a man, that is from him. But I'm going to ask his question first because, I can talk sometimes, just a bit. But, okay. As a black man who is also gay and struggles with racial and homophobic problems / people, what should I do when those thoughts about weed and how it can soothe my pain comes running through my mind? I finished it. Yeah.
Well, you stumped the panel. Congratulations.
Well, I don't know the exact answer, but what I would say is continually talk about it. That's where, like we were talking about us all finding our strength and telling our stories. Your story has so much more impact, right? And so when those, I can only speak from my experience with any negative thought. I have to talk about it usually, and then that usually helps it get better. You know what I mean? There's other steps we can take. I would encourage you to reach out to any one of us to find support groups, people to talk to, and be a part of the collaborative because we need other voices. We need other experience so you can be the voice for those others so they don't have to worry about where they can find support. You can be the start. So we need you.
I'm sorry. Okay, it's for Lori. I believe that's how you said your name. Your story specifically really, touched me. I even emailed you about it, but ended up asking the question anyway. So, as a mother who saw her child struggling and went as far as educating herself just to get the slightest chance to help them, did you find a positive way to deal with those emotions, other than the research you did on the substance overdoses and such?
Good question. Actually, the research helped me because the more I read, the more I learned about substance use disorder. And my son actually, when he was able to back then, said, "Wow, you know so much more now, Mom. You understand me better." It made us a whole lot closer. So, yes, I researched, but my research helped me learn more, and it changed how I dealt with him in such a positive fashion, and I treated him like a person, as you should. You go through a lot of anger as a parent when you're dealing with this, and oh my gosh. But the research helped me find that connection with him that I needed to.
So how would you, okay, so I'm Christian, and that's, kind of how I got out of it. I gave my life to God. And my brother, he suffers with certain things, and I don't really know how to help him. And it's like, I pray for him, and I know that God can save him, but I don't know what, as a person, I can do to help him become a better person and to see the things that I see and know that he can do. Because even just educating myself, he's older than me, and usually older people tend to have that mindset to where, oh, I've had much longer life, and this is just me enjoying myself. It's not a problem. And it's like watching him slowly destroy himself and destroy everything that he could be hurts me, and it makes me feel like a stranger to him.
One of the support groups I'm participating in right now is designed for families who have loved ones that are suffering with substance use disorder. And there was actually, in one of our meetings, it was a sibling. And it's very touching, and I just can't tell you how much it means to talk to other people who are walking the walk you're walking with the pain you're suffering. And I can give you those resources here later. But we also have here with our collaborative, we have a recovery and recovery supports group here locally that I would encourage you, and our emails are out there. You guys can find us. We're all pretty easy to find. But please reach out right after this tonight, and I'd be happy to talk with you. Bless your heart.
Thank you. I can forget.
You know, I might add one, yeah. One more word of encouragement, though, I might just suggest as you visit with your brother, you don't give up hope. It may not be the next time you talk to him or the 5th time. Maybe it's the 21st time that you tell him that you love him, or the 34th time. You have to be persistent also. You have to have the hope for him until he gets it for himself. So you stay the course as well. Next question. Anybody else? Yes, down front.
I'm short, so I got.
We can still hear you. It's okay.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you guys for sharing your stories and your experiences. And I wanted to say that I identify with you guys, but not in the way of substance abuse, but in the way of suicide and mental health, and that I've dealt with it for years. I'm a lot better now. But through that, I started a mental health group, which Seth already knows about. But my question was, if you hadn't gone through what you've gone through, and if you hadn't gone through that, do you think you would have been where you are today? And if you had the chance to go back, would you change it?
I can speak for myself. If I hadn't gone through what I've gone through, then I definitely wouldn't be where I'm at now, and I wouldn't change my life for anything. The family that I have now and the life that I have now is beyond. So I have a friend of mine that I've talked to, and I've heard it in the rooms. If I had gotten exactly what I wanted from recovery, I would have sold myself short. Like, it's been so much more than I could have imagined. Like, I wake up wanting to live and enjoying my life. And that comes not just from the recovery aspect, but also from the serving and the volunteering and seeing that light come on in other people's eyes too. So I absolutely wouldn't change anything.
I'm actually on the same page too. I wouldn't change anything. And of course, with that too, me being a person in long-term recovery, we always look back and think, boy, I caused a lot of damage, not just with myself, but everybody around me, especially when that cloud, that fog just comes off of us. We're like, what in the world did we just do? What have we been causing? And getting over that is really tough. But at the same time, it opens eyes to what the reality of everything is. So I also wouldn't change anything to it. That pain actually does something that nothing else in this world would do. I don't hope for more pain, but I'm actually glad that I do have some pain in my life. It's helped me grow in a different way that I would have never gotten without it.
So we have a saying in the Oxford houses, we aren't supposed to kick a dead horse too much, but I'm going to do it anyway. So no, I wouldn't change a thing, because I would possibly have missed out on the opportunity to see all of you stand up tonight, and miss the opportunity of meeting so many of you people that are showing such extreme amounts of courage, but also extreme amounts of care. When in the big picture, I mean, you really don't have to. So it's all part of that human experience, you know what I mean? Yeah. And part of that pain that goes along with that sometime is what makes these good things so much more beautiful, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, the question I got, I've been in recovery a long time, and I hit a pretty deep bottom to get into it, and I'm grateful for that bottom. And I don't think I'd be where I'm at today without that bottom. And I know, Seth, you had mentioned about you know, sometimes that bottom is death for some addicts. And that's terrible. But I guess my question is, you know, by keeping somebody from hitting that bottom that gets them to start thinking that they need to change their lives, are we keeping them from recovery? And what's the process of changing that, of doing, what are we going to do different to still get them into recovery? Because I don't think I'd be here if I hadn't hit that bottom that I hit.
I totally understand that thinking. And I think that it's one of those things where at that time, there probably weren't as many of those resources and those options that are available now. So what we're talking about is just not pushing that rock bottom is the only way, and not pushing what rock bottom looks like. Do you know what I mean? So for instance, we want to make sure that there are as many options, and that if people choose those options before they have 7 felonies and gone to jail 12 times, that when they seek out that option and start making a recovery, that they aren't ostracized for that as well, like can happen at some points. So basically, it's not necessarily saying that that gift of desperation can't come in and move someone when they're at a low point. We also just want to make sure that we're having those options available for people in that small window of time, because that window of time is just getting smaller and smaller. I don't know if that really answered the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, but I want to thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sincerely. I'm a little disappointed in my community. Why isn't this filled? Why? Every parent, wife, mother, brother of someone that has overdosed or someone that is suffering, why aren't they here? They need our help. And when I say thank you, I mean that, because you're brave to tell your story. And I appreciate you. And I know that you save lives. And I know that we all can save lives if we get more people to listen to what we have to say. I make a commitment. How can I get more people here at these sessions? Thank you.
Anybody else?
Real quick, I just want to mention those emails that are on your surveys with the QR code. Please use those. And if you would like, you can email myself, Lord, and any one of us on here actually is part of the Reno Recovery Collaborative. And we need people. We need people in our community to join that collaborative and to be able to take this message out to the street, to be able to get this room full, like you said. So thank you.
And if you'd like to engage with one of the panelists, they will hang around for a few minutes after we conclude this evening, because I know everybody feels comfortable coming forward and asking the questions. So we're going to invite Cody back to talk about some treatment options available in our community.
So first of all, I just want to thank all of the question askers. Not only were they great questions, but what courage, shown by the different folks who came up and asked really quality questions, so thank you. So just reflecting on this evening and some of the things we've heard, certainly we've heard about the wreckage that substance use disorder can cause, the heartbreak and the pain, but at the same time, we want to focus on the hope that can shine through. We have some really hopeful and inspirational stories of recovery. up here. We have family members who have found ways to cope, who have empowered themselves and found ways to help others. And so there really is a better way, and we want to, make this a community where those resources are available, where people know about them, and they feel comfortable accessing them and asking for help. And so, this evening, we do have a table out at the front when you enter the building that has some resources for some of the local organizations who provide outpatient care, residential care, reintegration. There are also resources of the support groups that have been mentioned, Oxford houses. These are all things that we would be happy to talk with anyone about. As Seth mentioned, each of our email addresses are on that sheet that you got when you walked in. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any one of us with any types of questions. And certainly, like Seth said, we need you on the Reno Recovery Collaborative. We want those voices, those great questions, and that courage that you guys have shown tonight. So we appreciate you being here. We hope to see all of you, plus more, everyone whom you tell about it at the next session in July and then the final one in August. So thanks again, and hope everyone has a great evening.
Okay, Anna, I'm going to invite her to put the wordle back up again. And so you have an opportunity, based upon what you've heard this evening, to enter some thoughts, some words, some reflections that have maybe has shifted from where we were at 7 o'clock. So get your phones out, go back to the web address at the top of the page, menti.com, and use the code 303-6312. Type in some words now that are going around in your brain. So apparently everybody had the same thought. Can't beat loved. Usually, there we go. Now we have some other words that are popping up. So you can keep entering in words if you like. This will continue to change as I wrap up the evening. On the survey page, there is a survey address at the top. There's also a QR code if you have the ability to scan with your cell phone. Both of these will take you to a survey to get your feedback on tonight's event. So either before you leave tonight or perhaps tomorrow, because if we don't do things quickly, they get pushed back by things that are apparently more important. So I encourage you to take that survey at your soonest opportunity. Once again, you can't say it enough times, the email addresses, if you've connected to one or more of our panelists this evening, I encourage you to reach out because they may be that one next step that you've been seeking, or perhaps you can share their email address with somebody who needs to connect. Speaking about Derek and Matt for a second, as guys, statistically, we don't talk about nothing. Sports, weather, feelings, no. So they have already beaten the odds in more than one way. So if you know a gentleman in your life that needs to talk to a guy about where they are, where they could be, I highly encourage you to seek out one of the gentlemen that are on this page right here. It's not often that you go to a community event and you get a peek into people's hearts, but that's what you saw tonight. Very real, very honest, very open testimonies about the paths that these folks have traveled to get to June 25th, 2021. So I'd like for you to once again join me in a round of applause, thanking them for their time this evening. So as you look ahead on your calendars, please once again mark down July 16th. We'll be right back in here at the historic Fox Theater. Invite a friend or a dozen to come join you. And with that, have a safe trip home.